You ever have one of those moments where you realize you've completely underestimated just how crazy suburbia can get? Yeah, that was me, standing in my own backyard, with a police officer at my pool and a woman named Linda screaming about unauthorized private use of community property. The sun was blazing, the water was sparkling, and I was just standing there, wondering how in the world my peaceful little dream home had turned into a courtroom drama. It all started a few months earlier, when I moved into Maplewood Estates, a picture-perfect neighborhood with white fences, freshly mowed lawns, and people who waved a little too enthusiastically. My house wasn't anything extravagant, but it had one thing I'd always wanted, a pool. After years in tiny apartments, I finally had space, privacy, and my own patch of blue heaven. For the first week, it felt like paradise. I'd float in the pool at sunset, sipping iced tea, thinking I'd finally made it. That's when she appeared, Linda McAllister, the self-appointed queen of our HOA. Late 50s, blonde bob, pearl necklace even on a Tuesday afternoon, clipboard like it was a royal scepter. She showed up at my door with this tight smile and said, "Welcome to Maplewood Estates. I'm the HOA president, indefinitely." I remember thinking, that's a weird choice of words. Then she glanced over my shoulder, saw the pool through the living room window, and her eyes lit up like she'd found buried treasure. "Oh, how wonderful," she cooed. "We haven't had a community pool in years." I blinked. "I'm sorry, community pool?" She gave this little laugh, sharp and sugary at the same time, and said, "Oh, don't be silly. The previous owners were so generous with it. Everyone used it. I'm sure you'll continue that tradition." Before I could say a word, she was already halfway down the driveway, waving like a politician at a parade. I stood there holding a stack of HOA rules she'd just handed me, thinking, did I just get voluntold into running a public pool? A few days later, I came home from work and saw her, stretched out on one of my deck chairs, sunglasses on, sipping lemonade like she owned the place. I froze. Linda?" She looked up, unfazed. "Oh, hey there, neighbor. Just cooling off. Hope you don't mind." I did mind. But I also didn't want to start a war my first week there, so I forced a smile and said, "Just, maybe give me a heads up next time?" She winked. "Of course, dear. Community spirit, and all that." Yeah, that community spirit turned into chaos. 2 weeks later, I came home to find 8 strangers splashing around in my pool. Kids cannonballing, parents with coolers, Linda blowing a whistle like she was running summer camp. "Isn't this wonderful?" she shouted over the noise. "Building neighborhood bonds." I walked right up to her. "Linda, this isn't a public pool. You can't just—" "Oh, relax, honey," she interrupted. "It's good for property values." That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a takeover. So I did what any rational person would do. I installed a heavy-duty lock on the gate. The next morning, there was a note taped to it in perfect cursive. "You're in violation of HOA Regulation 7.3 regarding access to shared amenities. Remove this lock immediately or face fines." I actually laughed out loud. Fines? For locking my own pool? But 2 days later, she doubled down. A laminated sign appeared on the fence listing community pool rules. No diving. No glass containers. Pool hours 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. It was so outrageous I almost admired her confidence. Almost. I started talking to the neighbors. Most of them just shrugged and said, "That's just Linda. She means well." But Tom, the guy 2 houses down, leaned in and whispered, "She tried to claim my hot tub last year. Called it a community relaxation zone." I had to threaten legal action before she backed off. Apparently, this was her hobby, claiming other people's property for the community. But my pool was her ultimate power play. Then came the breaking point. One Tuesday, I came home early, headache pounding, and there they were, Linda and 3 other women in matching swimsuits, doing synchronized swimming routines to Dancing Queen. A boombox blaring, Linda barking orders like she was training Olympians. I snapped. I stormed outside, crossed my arms, and said, "Linda, this ends now. You and your friends, out." She climbed out of the pool, dripping, floral swim cap glistening, and said, in this icy hiss, "You're making a big mistake. The HOA will hear about this." And she meant it. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to see Officer Reynolds, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. And behind him, Linda, arms folded, smug as ever. "Sir," the officer said, We got a call about a dispute over community property access. Linda stepped forward dramatically. This man is violating our HOA charter. That pool is designated community property, and he's selfishly hoarding it. I swear, I heard a few blinds open across the street. Half the neighborhood was watching. I just sighed, told the officer, "Give me 1 second," and walked back inside. Came out with a folder I'd been keeping, my property deed, survey, title documents. I handed it to him and said, "The pool's entirely on my land. Installed years before the HOA even existed." He flipped through it, eyebrows climbing higher with each page. Then he looked up, suppressing a smile. "Well, looks pretty clear to me. Ma'am, this isn't community property. If you enter without permission again, that's trespassing." Linda's face went red, like tomato red. She looked around at the neighbors gathered on their lawns. "You all use that pool. Tell him." No one said a word. Tom muttered, "Told you she was wrong." The officer handed me my papers, nodded politely, and left. Linda just stood there, frozen, her little HOA empire crumbling right there on my lawn. But she wasn't done, not yet. The neighbors had seen enough, though. Mrs. Chun from across the street called for a special HOA meeting to discuss leadership changes. I showed up that night with every document I had, deed, police report, even a printed copy of the HOA charter. Linda tried to start the meeting like nothing had happened, but Mrs. Chin cut her off. "We're here to vote on your removal," she said flatly. Linda launched into this speech about preserving community harmony and tradition, but it fell flat. I stood up, calmly laid down my papers, and said, "My property was never included in the HOA boundaries. The pool isn't even mentioned in your charter." The lawyer sitting in the corner cleared his throat and said, "He's right." And actually, Mrs. McAllister, while reviewing property records, we discovered something interesting. Your own house is 15 feet outside the HOA zone. Technically, you were never eligible to serve on the board. The room went dead silent. Then laughter. Linda's face drained of color. She sputtered, "That can't be right. I've been president for 7 years. Tom crossed his arms and said dryly, "Yeah, 7 years too long." She grabbed her purse, muttering something about appeals and legal reviews, and stormed out, heels clacking down the hall. A week later, the new HOA board sent her a $4,800 bill, reimbursement for legal fees caused by her little stunt. I heard she sold her house quietly a month after that. Now, my backyard is peaceful again. I put up a tall privacy fence, added a motion sensor speaker that greets anyone who gets too close. Welcome to private property. This pool is not community property. Every time it goes off, I can't help but grin. Sometimes I sit out there at sunset, floating on the water, and think about how easily people can convince themselves they're doing something for the community, when really, it's just about control. But hey, I learned one thing for sure. Nothing brings a neighborhood together like watching the HOA tyrant get dethroned. So what do you think? Was I right to fight back, or should I have just shared the pool to keep the peace? Drop a comment below. I'd love to know where you stand on this one.